Christians are the highest gun-owning demographic in America. Christians own guns at a higher rate than the general population. And when it comes to the death penalty, Christians are the biggest defenders of the death penalty. The Bible Belt is the execution belt in the United States. So that troubles me, because of my love for life, and it fuels my activism on these issues.
This is Down to Earth Conversations, where we hear from ordinary people who are helping to bring a bit of heaven down to earth. Kia ora. Welcome to another episode of Down to Earth Conversations. I'm Angie Dixon. It's good to have you here. We're in for a ripper of a conversation today. Shane Claiborne is such a beautiful human being, and it was a privilege to speak to him. As you'll hear in the conversation, he has his finger in many interlinking pies, and so I actually spoke to him on his phone with him pulled over on the side of the road, having just finished for the day in DC and heading off to his next destination. And we managed to finish the conversation with him on 1% on his phone. So got in just in time. One of the things I love about Shane is he's just so humble and relatable. He's just an ordinary guy, and yet he's learned that his life can make a difference, and so he's given himself to that. Some of you will have listened to episode 17 with Caz Tod-Pearson from The Simple Way, and Shane is one of the founders of The Simple Way, and he's still a huge part of that community in Philadelphia. We don't actually go into this so much because there's so much else to talk about, but if you want to hear more about The Simple Way, go back and listen to that chat with Caz in episode 17. We do cover a whole bunch of stuff in this conversation, and none in the depth that we could have, so at the end I'll connect you with some of the books that Shane has written and other places to find thoughts from him, so you can dig deeper if you want to. We cover his time with Mother Teresa, his activism and civil disobedience, his pacifism and commitment to non-violence, including his time in Iraq during the war, and his fight against gun violence and the electric chair. It's action-packed and sure to leave you inspired. This is episode 29 of Down to Earth Conversations. Here's Shane Claiborne. So thank you for joining me.
Absolutely.
I know some of my listeners will have heard you, but not all of them. So why don't we start with just how would you describe who is Shane Claiborne?
Cool. Yeah, man. Good to be with you. So I grew up down in Tennessee in, what we call the Bible Belt here in the U.S. and really surrounded with the Christian subculture. We had all the T-shirts and bumper stickers and whatnot. And I fell in love with Jesus. I also began to identify some of the contradictions that I saw in the church, and in my own life too, kind of being formed and shaped by that. And, I've really learned to appreciate what Gandhi said when he was asked about Christianity. And he said, I love Jesus. I just wish the Christians acted more like them, And so I wanted to be as faithful as possible to the things Jesus said. So I was really, I admired Jesus and the things he said in the Sermon on the Mount. Love your enemies, sell what you have and give it to the poor. I just hadn't seen many people live that out. So I went up to Philly, and I went to Philly to go to college, to university, and I wanted to study sociology because I like, Karl Barth says we need to read the Bible in one hand, but the newspaper in the other, so that our faith doesn't just become a ticket into heaven and an excuse to ignore the world we live in. So that really was massive for me. It's where I got sort of radicalized. As I was in my undergraduate work, that there was a group of homeless families that moved into an abandoned Catholic church in Philly. And that's where a lot of things changed for me. I sort of had my second baptism in that old abandoned church. And our community is the fruit of that. So a couple of years later, we started The Simple Way, which has been around about over 20 years now. And So yeah, man, that's a little bit snapshot of the last 45 years.
Yeah, totally. And we'll talk a little bit about some specific things you've been up to as we go through the podcast. But I guess as you started off being passionate about all of this, you ended up in India with Mother Teresa. How did that come about?
Yeah, so right after the takeover of the abandoned church, where a group of homeless moms and kids were living in this abandoned church building, and we started a student solidarity movement to support them, and that all of that was happening, and we decided in the summer after that, let's learn from somebody that seems to be really serious about their faith. And there were a lot of great dead people, but when we started looking at who was still alive, Mother Teresa was alive, and we wrote her a letter, and eventually ended up calling on the phone, and she picked up the phone, and we spent the summer, some of my college friends and I, in India, and I worked in the home for the dying, and I worked in the orphanages, and that has made a big impact on my life and on our community too. I mean, one of Mother Teresa's lines was, what's important is not how much you do, but how much love you put into doing it. So we're called to do, not great things, but small things with great love. And in fact, even our name, The Simple Way, was inspired by some of that, the charism of Mother Teresa. And she wrote a book called The Simple Path. And she used to say, following Jesus is simple, but that doesn't mean it's easy.
Yeah. When you were heading over there, you obviously had some ideas of what it would be like. Was it like that, or was it different to what you were expecting? Or how was that experience actually turning up there?
Yeah, well, what I didn't really expect was how many other people showed up there to help sustain the wonderful work that Mother Teresa and the sisters had started. So there were volunteers from all over the world. So, I never really had this idea that I would be Mother Teresa's little college intern, but I didn't realize there'd be dozens of just amazing people, doctors and students and grandmothers, and everything that had come over there to work. And we did worship services each day. We were in prayer every day together. And then we started the work in the homes. And it was a lot like I imagined it, really. I mean, we were literally bringing people off the streets that were dying, and we were holding their hands and, singing with them. And as Mother Teresa said, walking with them so that they weren't alone as they died, and it was very holy work. One of my friends said, it felt like we were travel agents, between this world and the next one. And, so yeah, it was incredible work.
Yeah. Awesome. And how did life then change for you when you got back?
Mother Teresa, she had a wonderful commission. She said, you don't have to go to Calcutta to find Calcutta. Calcuttas are everywhere if we'll only have eyes to see. And, one of the things I learned going to India is you don't have to go across the world, to find folks that are struggling to make it. In fact, sometimes it's easier to love people on the other side of the world than the people right across town.
Yeah.
So we came back to Philly and started our work, with that vision of sort of, this is our place, and what does it look like to wrestle the principalities and powers that are here, the things that are squashing people's dignity and hope, and what does it look like to usher in God's dream for our city, for our neighborhood, for our block, and so that's what we set out to do.
Yeah. The Simple Way is the community that you're part of. If people want to find out more about that, they can listen to my episode 17, where I chat with Caz Tod-Pearson, who's the current director of that. So we won't go into all of what that's about. But when you think back over the last sort of 20 years or so of that community, what is it that you're most proud of?
I think just being a place for that long, you grow roots, just like a tree. When you've created a sort of root system of relationships and and trust, takes a long time to do that. So I'm proud to, been able to call that place home for these years. It's, very countercultural too. I think stability is a traditional kind of faith value of the monastic traditions, a lot of the saints are remembered for the place they, St. Francis of Assisi, Mother Teresa of Calcutta. And so I'm not comparing myself to the saints, but I think what they did was they had a real calling to a place and to a people. So, even the proper nouns in the gospel, Jesus of Nazareth, Capernaum. So I love, my neighborhood and the people there. They inspire me all the time. I mean, even in COVID, we became a COVID testing site. My neighbors were delivering food to the seniors and to the people that were vulnerable. So it's just it's an amazing place with this kind of resilient faith that defies all the obstacles. So, when we started our community, one of the first books that we read was a book by Dietrich Bonhoeffer called Life Together. And one of the things he talks about is that if we just have this grandiose vision of community, we can destroy people trying to build that vision. But if you focus more on loving the people around you, then the community emerges from that. So, he said, the person that loves community destroys community. It's kind of very counterintuitive, but you got to just focus on the people right next to you. And so we've tried to do that, for 20 years. And we've, not lived up to that aspiration every day or every year, but we've tried to, and we've allowed community to evolve and change the programs that we run to be rooted in relationships and to sort of, continue to take new forms. So the other thing that we've tried to do is to hold together the relational stuff in our neighborhood with the activist work for justice. So I think compassion and justice need to work together like blades of scissors, and Martin Luther King had a great way that he talked about the Good Samaritan story that Jesus told about rescuing the person in the ditch. And Martin Luther King, he said, we're all called to lift our neighbor out of the ditch. But after you lift so many people out of the ditch, you want to do something about the road to Jericho so that people don't keep ending up in the ditch. So those, really go together. So for 25 years, we've lifted people out of the ditch, but we've also been asking the question of why do people keep ending up in the ditch to begin with?
Yeah. And that's something that I've observed from across the globe, is that you seem to have this real balance of public, big, justice-focused conversation and activism, but still managing to stay committed to your home community and loving your neighbours on a real intimate level. Has that been a hard balance to carry, or is it been like those blades of the scissors where it just naturally has gone together for you?
Well, it takes intentionality, and like, for instance, I've always had a limit on the amount of days that I'm away from my community. And I've discerned that with the people closest to me, so that I'm not just talking about what we do, but we're doing it and we're not losing our feet on the ground, But I find if I'm a little lopsided and I begin to feel a little imbalanced, so like, for instance, if I'm just giving away food, I start to feel like I want to do something about why people are hungry. But if I'm only in the streets and we're, meetings in Washington trying to change the policy stuff, I find myself really longing to be home and play in a fire hydrant and weed the garden, and hang out with the kids. So, and I think a lot of people, when they talk about burnout, it's maybe because we haven't held those things together. So this year has been pretty unique, man. After 25 years in Philly, Katie and I have been spending a lot of time this year with our family in North Carolina and Tennessee. So we have a old school bus that's converted into a little mobile tiny house with a composting toilet and solar panels, and we're living on that. And
awesome.
I get to go back to Philly every chance I get. But we've been having more than just a holiday. with our biological family, which is a real gift, man. So
nice.
My dad died when I was young, and my mom and I are really, really tight. I'm her only kid, so I'm loving spending some time with her. I just we'll be headed over there for her birthday in a few days.
Oh, nice. Oh, I hope you enjoy that. This passion for loving your neighbor has gone really deep for you, and it is more than just handing out some food and thing, like to the point where you've actually done acts of civil disobedience and been arrested while standing up for people. What sorts of things have you gotten up to, and why is it that you've done that?
Well, there's a great tradition in the church of going to jail, I mean, starting with Jesus, I guess, maybe even earlier than that with the prophets, in the Hebrew scriptures. But, with Jesus and the disciples, there's this sense that we are not just trying to defend the status quo of the world, but we're reimagining the world. What would it look like if God's dream were realized on earth, or as Jesus said, to pray the kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven? And the people who have really done that work of the gospel, seeking first the kingdom of God, have found themselves in what, John Lewis called good trouble. Dr. Martin Luther King, when he went to jail, he said, at first I was a little troubled to go to jail, but then I looked at history and saw what good company we have, behind bars. So, I think that tradition of good trouble and holy mischief is something that we see all through Scripture. Folks that are ruffling the feathers, and the early Christians that are in Acts. It says that these folks are causing trouble all over the empire, and so it's never our goal to go to jail. But I think that there comes a point where, as St. Augustine said, an unjust law is no law at all. So we want to try to challenge the policies and the forces that are hurting our brothers and sisters. So the first time I went to jail was actually with friends who were homeless. And Philadelphia was passing laws that made it illegal to sleep in public and illegal to share food. You couldn't grab a pizza and share it in the park. So we wanted to challenge those laws, and we did, and we went to jail for that. And, I lost count, around 30 arrests, I guess, but we've often won in court, and we've exposed the unjust laws by challenging them. And some folks that grew up in the church, they'll raise the question of Paul's writing in Romans that we're meant to respect the authorities. And I always found it ironic that Paul, who wrote that verse, ended up for going to jail for disrespecting the authorities.
Yeah.
So, but I think there's two ways to respect the authorities. And one is by obeying the good laws. And the second is by respectfully disobeying the bad laws. And so we've always been committed to nonviolence, but we see the value of direct action and, nonviolent civil disobedience. And so we've done that, even recently, in the past year, we've gone to jail for challenging the policies of Donald Trump. And I'm very proud of those. Yeah. I tell the kids in our neighborhood, you can get arrested for doing things that are wrong, and you can get arrested for doing things that are right. When you see us going to jail, we're going to jail for things that are right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that's a big thing for the kids in your community to see, actually, here's someone, standing up for what's right, and still being mistreated, showing them that actually life isn't fair, but we need to take a stand for the good.
Yeah. And, many of them know that because we've seen disproportionately young people of color who are going to jail for doing nothing at all, or who are being shot for doing nothing at all. Yeah. So I think there's a sort of suspicion that many of the young people in my neighborhood and throughout our country have, especially young people of color, that the system is not God ordained all the time, right? Like this is not the hand of God that we see working, but we see our systems are very broken and they are destroying the lives of many people. And we need some massive changes in our country. So we've been in the middle of this racial reckoning, and I'm grateful for it. I think the Black Lives Matter movement, the new sanctuary movement around immigration, and so many other, the Poor People's Campaign, so many of the things happening in our country, people of faith are at the very heart of it.
I guess, again, looking from across the globe, it's very heartening to see people like yourself and the others behind those movements standing up for what's right. And that's inspiring to look at our own country and go, what is it here that I need to stand up for? We don't have exactly the same situation as you have, but that doesn't mean we don't have the same sort of problems and the same sort of things that we need to take a stand for. So, really inspiring.
Well, it goes both ways. My brother Jared McKenna and so many others over there, a lot of your folks have been really, dear friends and have inspired a lot of us too. A lot of the Maori leaders and also in Australia, the Aboriginal leaders, like they've been incredible inspirations for me. So you got a lot of good reckoning happening over there. But a lot of the work around environmental justice, around Indigenous rights, those are all very similar to what we're up to here.
Yeah, awesome. You mentioned that non-violence was a really key part of what you're about. Particularly when you do these acts of civil disobedience. What is it that drives that particularly?
Well, for me, my primary motivation is Jesus. As I look at Jesus's life, there's this unmistakable presence of love, even for enemies, of nonviolence. Even as he's being killed, he says, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." And it's not a sentimentalism. I think it's and it's not that he's just being walked over, but I think he's showing us that we wear hatred down with love, that we don't use the same tools as those who are against us to fight them. And in fighting the beast, you don't become the beast, and really that love triumphs over evil. I mean, it's what Jesus does on the cross is absorb all the violence of the world and subvert it with love, forgiveness, and an empty tomb. And even when Peter kind of impulsively picks up his sword to defend Jesus, Jesus scolds him and says, "Put it away. You live by the sword, you die by the sword." And then he heals the guy that Peter wounded. And the early Christians understood that as really the final triumph over the sword. Tertullian and others said, when Jesus disarmed Peter, he disarmed all of us. Because if ever there was a case for trying to use violence to protect the innocent, Peter had the case when he picked up his sword. But I think Jesus just consistently shows that as the Prince of Peace. So that, and in addition to my commitment to Jesus, I just see, so many of the folks that inspire me, like Dr. King and Dorothy Day and Oscar Romero and all sorts of folks around the world. It was that commitment to nonviolence that was a part of their spiritual DNA.
Yeah. And your commitment to it isn't just I know people that would say that they're pacifists, but they're very rarely in a situation, or maybe even never in a situation where they have to actually enact that theology in a real way. But your commitment to that has taken you into situations where that's a real thing, like the civil disobedience stuff. Like you went to Iraq, is that right? Was that during the Gulf War that you were there?
Yeah, I went to Iraq in 2003. And, everything unfolded. It was a little unclear exactly the timeline for what was going to happen. But what ended up happening was we were in Baghdad during the bombing and the escalation of the war as it kind of launched there. So what a lot of us remember is the shock and awe campaign, 900 some bombs a day that were being dropped in Baghdad and Iraq. And so I saw some of the most horrific things that I've ever seen. but I also became as convinced as ever that violence is not going to solve the violence, right? That it's only adding fuel to the fire. So I saw that firsthand, in Iraq.
And what was it that got you over there? Like, did you just wake up one morning and go, "Hey, they're going to drop bombs on Iraq. Let's head over there"? What was that?
Well, I did know of groups like Christian peacemaker teams that were founded around the idea that we've got to be more organized for peace than people are organized for war. And we've got to be as willing to die for the cross as people have been willing to die for the sword. So we need that kind of courageous, nonviolent witness in the world. Look at all the courage that people have shown for violence and for war and militarism, risk their lives, And so I didn't go to Iraq, to be a martyr or anything, but I went with this deep conviction. Do I really believe that Jesus meant that we're to love our enemies and that that we're to live by the cross, not the sword, that we've got to be willing to die for something, and that was, and I didn't obviously see Iraqis as my enemy, but I know my country did. And so, we went over there to try to bear witness. And I mean, it was an amazing group. Voices for Creative Nonviolence, Christian Peacemaker teams, all these groups came together, and we had veterans, we had pastors, we had grandmothers and grandfathers and young people all together. And I spent a month there, and there's so many things, that it's more than I can say on a podcast. But I'll tell you, one experience was there was a prayer service right as the bombs started to fall in Iraq, in Baghdad. And there were hundreds of Christians from different traditions that had come together. And they read a statement that was collaboratively written, and it was written to address to Muslims. And it said, "We want you to know that we love you and that we're made from the same dirt of this earth. We come from the same dysfunctional family of Abraham and Sarah," and it was this beautiful statement. And then one of the bishops pointed to the cross, and he said, "The cross is a centerpiece of our faith, and it teaches us how to live in a world with such violence and evil without mirroring that violence and evil. And it's the narrow way that leads to life." And so, the whole place erupted in singing Amazing Grace in Arabic. And I was so moved, as I listened to this familiar song, but now in Arabic. I went up and I got tears rolling down my cheeks. And I said to one of the bishops, I had no idea that there were so many Christians in Iraq. And he stopped me in my tracks and very humbly said, "Yes, son, this is where Christianity started." And he said, "You didn't invent it in America, you domesticated it." And this, Iraqi bishop said to me, he said, "You go back and you tell the church in the United States that we are praying for them to remember who they are." Wow. And he pointed out the window and he said, "That's the Tigris and the Euphrates. Have you heard of those?" He said, "This is the land of your ancestors." And so, I kind of walked away with a much deeper sense of my own faith and my own history. And also that, America is not the center of the world. And, I think it's most of us know that, but we're really good at acting like we are the center of the world over here.
Oh, that sounds like an amazing experience, and glad you came home from that. But yeah, you've continued on. One of the things you've been really vocal about is gun violence, and the need to change the way that America thinks about guns. I can hear in your passion, what's driving you to that. What particularly made you go, actually, this is a fight I want to take up?
Yeah, well, first of all, these things are not disconnected from each other, right? Like, again, Martin Luther King said, "I've told the kids in the ghettos not that violence won't solve their problems." But then they asked me, why does our government use massive doses of violence to try to bring the change it wants? And Dr. King said, I knew I couldn't speak against the violence in our neighborhoods without speaking against the violence of our government. And I mean, he said he called the U.S. government the biggest purveyor of violence in the world. So it's not disconnected, you know. In fact, when I got home from Iraq, the kids on my block had written in sidewalk chalk, "War no more." They had written, you know, these messages, peace, you know, like love one another. And so it's my commitment to life, you know, that drives me, that every person is made in the image of God. Every person's a child of God. And I will say that, you know, we grew up saying that we were pro-life in the church, in the Bible Belt, but we really only thought about one issue most of the time, which was abortion. And I think a lot of folks who say that they are pro-life would be more accurate to say that they're pro-birth or they're anti-abortion, because it was as if life began at conception and ended at birth, you know, like, because these other issues, Christians have often been on the wrong side of life. And so I wrote a book on gun violence, and I wrote a book on the death penalty, because I saw on these two particular issues, and you could also say militarism and the war in Iraq. I mean, Christians were some of the biggest champions of the war. But Christians are the highest gun-owning demographic in America. Wow. Christians own guns at a higher rate than the general population. And when it comes to the death penalty, Christians are the biggest defenders of the death penalty. The Bible Belt is the execution belt in the United States. So that troubles me, you know, because of my love for life. And it fuels my activism on these issues. And I'm really excited. I mean, I'm very hopeful that we can see changes on the death penalty and gun violence, and hopefully militarism and military spending too. So, yeah.
On the gun violence thing, I think one of the best quotes I saw in the whole of the early stages of the pandemic last year was one of yours saying, people saying, I don't want to wear a mask because God will protect me, but I need a gun. You know, there's something wrong with that theology.
Yeah, well, I will never understand that theology that I don't need to wear a mask because God will protect me from the pandemic, but I need an assault rifle.
Yeah. You've not only just, again, written books about it, but you've actually got involved in it. I know not that long ago, you did a bit of a tour with your bus and actually asked people to bring their guns and melted them down.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about, you know, how did that happen? Did you see a result of that? Did people come and bring their guns? Did you get much response?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first of all, the you know, what inspired the transformation of the guns was a verse from the prophets Micah and Isaiah in the Old Testament. They cast this vision of beating swords into plows and spears into pruning hooks, right? And they go on to kind of put this beautiful vision of a world where people live without fear and study war no more. But we love that idea of transforming metal that is designed to kill, swords into plows, you know, into tools that are meant to cultivate life. And so we began inviting people to donate guns. We have more guns than people in the United States. We've got about 5% of the global population in the U.S., but we have almost half of the world's guns.
Wow.
And it's just unbelievable, right? And at the same time, listen to this. 2/3 of Americans live without guns. So, you know, it's mind-boggling. So anyway, we figure people have got guns they want to get rid of, and they did. First gun donated was an AK-47, a weapon of war that's still legal on our streets.
Wow. And
then we've had hundreds of guns donated since then. In fact, I'm, you know, joining you from the car because I was in DC with a bunch of young people taking guns off the streets of Washington, DC, and we made shovels yesterday. And we were literally making shovels out of guns as the news story from San Jose, where 9 people were killed, another mass shooting in America happened. So what I love about that vision of the prophets is they take things into their own hands, right? And they begin to transform their weapons into garden tools. And, after every mass shooting, our preachers and our politicians offer thoughts and prayers. And I believe in thoughts and prayers, but I also believe in action. And I believe that thoughts and prayers can be a place to hide from responsibility if we aren't careful. So, when people say, all we can do is pray, I always say, no, that may not be true. We can pray, but we can also organize.
Yeah.
And we can get in the streets. We can change policies and laws and make it harder for people to kill other folks. So, I believe that things like the gun problem, folks will say it's not a gun problem, it's a heart problem. And I say it's both. God heals hearts and people change laws. And we need both. We need to address the heart problem, and we need to address some of the policies that need changing in our country around guns and the death penalty, without a doubt. I mean, tomorrow, listen to this, tomorrow I'm going to South Carolina, where South Carolina just brought back the firing squad and the electric chair as valid methods of execution. And so I'm going there with a group of other folks to raise our voice and try to say we can do better than killing, to show that killing's wrong.
Yeah. So just one last question about the death penalty. Last week you were out campaigning to try and stop the execution of Quinton Jones, and unfortunately that execution went ahead. And yet now you say you're on the road to South Carolina to challenge those recent decisions about the death penalty. What is it that keeps you going in the midst of the heartbreak when what you're campaigning for doesn't see results immediately?
There's a few things, I guess. One of them is I always come back to what Jesus modeled for us, which is, I think, one of the most profound acts of solidarity the world has ever seen, is that God leaves all the comfort of heaven to join the struggle here on earth and is born a brown-skinned Palestinian, Jewish refugee, executed on a cross, and even felt that despair that we felt maybe a little glimpse of in Texas, right, this last week, when he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? So I think there's moments where Jesus felt that and we feel that. So we carry it together. And I think the movement and the community is also how we carry it, that we bear one another's burdens. So, and for me, I didn't know Quinton Jones. I've known other folks that were executed, but I didn't know him personally. But we're standing there with a woman that met him that morning, has been meeting him 11 years as his friend. And then she watched him get executed. And they come out of that room and tell us that when they touched his body, incidentally, for the first time, she was able to touch his body after 11 years of knowing him, because they weren't allowed contact visits, was after he was dead. And she said his body was still warm. His body was still warm because they had just killed him. But to be there with her, right? For her not to be alone in that moment. That's why we're doing this, to know that George Floyd should never have been killed. He should still be alive. We remember him this week on the anniversary, but we will not allow that family to be alone. And I think that solidarity is why we're doing all of this, is to remind each other that you're not alone. There's a God that is with those who suffer, and we're doing our best to walk alongside those who are suffering and bear the burdens with them.
And you're doing a great job of it too. In the show notes, I'll put links to all your social media sites and mention a bunch of your books in there. Real pleasure to have you. Real pleasure to meet you. And really appreciate your public challenge, your call to action for the rest of us, simply by being who you are and doing what you do. So thank you for bringing a bit of heaven down to earth.
You too, man. Thanks. Let's do it again sometime. Thanks everybody for listening. All right. Take care.
Hello, hello heaven. Will I hear you whisper to come near?
I'm so grateful to Shane for blessing us with this conversation. I admire his willingness to actively live out his faith in a way that involves sacrifice, opposition, and even arrest, but also brings great freedom and joy, both to him and to others. One thing we didn't really get to, but is a huge part of Shane's current work, is his co-founding of a movement called Red Letter Christians, based around the words of Jesus that are often highlighted and read in our Bibles. These are people who have gone back to the scriptures and said, what if Jesus actually meant what he said? What if when Jesus asked us to love our enemies, he actually meant that? Maybe loving them means not killing them. What if Jesus really meant that caring for the poor is like caring for Jesus himself? And how would that change how we live? What if Jesus really meant it when he chastised the religious for who they kept out, and then gave us an example by welcoming all those whom the religious system was rejecting? Red Letter Christians includes authors, speakers, pastors, academics, and heaps of others. Check out their website in the show notes for articles and links that are guaranteed to get you thinking. And as they kicked off the movement, Shane actually co-wrote a book with Tony Campolo about a decade ago called Red Letter Revolution, which I 100% recommend. Other books Shane has written include his first book, The Irresistible Revolution, written again about a decade ago, about how his journey began and about the community that he helped found the Simple Way. In Executing Grace, he goes more into the death penalty, which is still in place in a number of states, particularly in the Bible Belt, and his most recent book, Beating Guns, is about the gun issue in America and his commitment to non-violence. So for those and a bunch of others, head to his website, shaneclaiborne.com, and he's also written a heap of articles that you can find on redletterchristians.org, and I'll have both of those in the show notes. So thanks, Shane, for your time, your words, your life. And here is a simple blessing I offer you in return. As you continue to live life, be it in Philadelphia, elsewhere with family, or on the road, may you continue to find the simple way to be the life-giving way. May serving the disadvantaged always push you to the microphone to challenge the systems that put them there. And may being in public view always remind you of the people who need help now before the system changes. And may God continue to fill you with grace and passion for both. As you stand against executions, celebrating life even of those who have taken it, may your words and actions not fall on deaf ears, but be a catalyst for change, even if it's only one mind and heart at a time. As you beat guns, moulding and shaping them, may you see peace in each shovel, each one representing changed lives, and knowing that your life, which you are allowing Jesus to mould and shape, is also a tool for good in this world. And may those red letters of Scripture, the words of Jesus, continue to mould and shape you, to challenge you and to bring you peace. May they drive you in hope towards a better future for us all. And lastly, no matter what you do or don't do, what you can change and what you can't, may you know that you are seen, you are known, and you are loved. As usual, thanks to Strawn for the music and Rangi for the karakia, and thank you all for listening. Join me next time when I talk to Naomi Nicholas from Karuwha Trust, an organisation helping New Zealanders navigate our complex history and encouraging cross-racial conversation and action. We talk about what her work involves, how she got into it, and where she, as a Pākehā, has found her fit in the conversation. Until then, me inoi tātou.
E tō mātou matua I te rangi, kia tapu tō ingoa, kia tau mai tō rangatiratanga, kia mea te tau e pai ai ki runga ki te whenua, kia rite anō ki tō te rangi. Humai kia mātou ai nei, he taro mā mātou mō tēnei rā. Mura o mātou hara, me mātou hoki e muru nei I o te hunga, e hara ana kia mātou. Aua hoki mātou e kawea, kia whakawaia. Engari whakaorangi a mātou I te kino.